This is Kate Swoboda, creator of YourCourageousLife.com, director of the Courageous Living Coach certification at TeamCLCC.com, and author of the book, The Courage Habit, which is available at booksellers and at Amazon. The Your Courageous Life podcast is all about going after what you want and creating and living a more courageous, emotionally resilient life. Might drop a couple of F-bombs, so maybe don't listen with your kids in the backseat of the car. And here we go with today's episode. Hey y'all, hey, it's Kate. And it's been quite a while, hasn't it? There are reasons for that. I'll talk about them in this podcast. I have hit record and started to talk and then stopped and then gone back and deleted and then started over and hit record, over and over and over. Because for the first time in my 15 plus year career as a life coach, as somebody who has really taken an approach with my life of whatever it is that I am currently sorting through, I'm deeply contemplative about it. I read a lot of different voices on the human experience. I think about my experience and of being human and compare and contrast it with my clients' experiences of being human. By the way, I think that's one of my favorite parts of being a life coach is just all the myriad ways that one can choose to do a life and all the things that we have in common and then all the things that are so different. And then I sit down and I write, and I have always had a deep yearning to use my life as a place where these fumbling questions, these difficulties, these places of intense longing and grief, of triumph, of contentment, of agitation, that it all somehow has had meaning for me for really longer than 15 years, because before I became a life coach, it was just self-help and personal growth and development and reading and investigating, just without the life coach piece. But let's say the last 2 decades. And my entire life feels very rearranged right now. And there are a couple reasons for this. And then there are a lot of reasons for this that I could not even point to. I'm sure they're there, but I could not even point to them. Here is what I believe in this moment. And I am sharing about this again from that place of maybe there's somebody else out there who's gone through something like this. What I've always heard from other people when they've described something like what I'm trying to describe and still struggle to have the words for is that it's usually tipped off by some major event, like getting laid off from the company that they had devoted their lives to building. Getting a divorce, especially an unexpected divorce where you didn't realize that the marriage was in trouble, a health crisis, things like that. And as far as I can tell, my own process has been more of a slow boil, a slow unraveling. It's that thing where now that I look back over the last couple years of my life, I go, oh, okay. Yeah, I see the breadcrumbs that made up the trail that led here. But in the moment, I could not see it. And I'm quite sure that there's more that I am unable to see. So this podcast, I suppose, is about the liminal space. That's what my coach, Leanne Raymond, calls it, the liminal space. That strange place between one side of the bridge and the other. As a coach, one of my favorite metaphors, when people have been feeling caught between two different decisions, I guess you could say, would be the metaphor of the boat and the dock. The metaphor of the boat and the dock is, let's say a client is trying to decide in a marriage, do I stay or do I go? A job, do I stay or do I go? Whatever it might be. And my position has always been that if you have one foot on the dock and one foot on the boat, that is an exhausting position to maintain, that it is actually, in fact, better for you to just say, that's it, I'm getting on the boat and the boat is setting sail, or to just go, I'm calling a thing. I'm not ready to get on the boat yet. Let me stay on the dock. And let me, usually when people choose to stay on the dock, the work is, let me not judge myself for that. Let me just be okay with the fact that I am not ready to get on the boat yet. All of the world is like, get on the boat, take the adventure, dare to dream. Yeah, not everybody's ready for the boat yet. And that's something that I've held space for as a coach many a time. But now I would add to that metaphor a little bit, which is something like maybe liminal space is kind of like there's a dock and there's a boat. And instead of trying to stand with one foot on the dock and one foot on the boat, you're in the fucking water treading. And like the boat is there and maybe you'll climb into it and the dock is there and maybe you'll climb back up onto that. But in the meantime, you're just in the fucking water treading. And it's not awful. It's not turbulent water. It's a nice, totally legitimate lake. Beautiful scenery, at least in my own composition of my own liminal space. Beautiful trees all around, nature, and, it's not like a creepy lake. There are creepy lakes. We can all agree on this, right? It's not a creepy lake. And you're fine and you have plenty of energy and you're not going to drown, but it's still like, I'm in the water. And I don't know anymore what the dock even is or what the boat is. I hope that just made sense. With the old boat in the dock metaphor that I would use, it was, like moving into those equations of do I stay or do I go? The dock is the marriage that you think you might want to leave, and the boat is the, getting in it and going into a new life without your partner. Or the dock is the company that you have been with for 10 years, and the boat is the new company that you've just been offered a position for, and, you're just not sure if you want to leave the old company, all that stuff. The boat, the dock, and then instead of having one foot on the boat and one foot on the dock, you are in the water and you are not even sure what the dock is or the boat is anymore. That's liminal space. And the reason that I frame it that way is because in this rearrangement of my life that I'm in right now, I look now at what I thought was the dock and I go, was it? Was that life that I was living what I thought it was? And then I look at the boat and it's like, I'd rather tread water and see where this is going than just grab that boat that's right over there and go, this is it, this is the next step. Because to be honest with you, I don't know that that's the boat for me. I don't know that that's where I want to go next. So that to me is the experience of liminal space. It's not altogether unpleasant. There are times when it really is. I'm not going to lie. There are times when it's like, what the fuck? And those times are very difficult. And those are the times, by the way, when I am so grateful for the tools. I did a podcast early in the pandemic, like a couple weeks into the pandemic, back when we all thought that if we just stayed home and wore some masks for a couple weeks, we'd quote unquote flatten the curve, And I said in that podcast, and I still believe this is what we train for. We don't train for when life is just peachy. That's not why you're getting into the meditation every day. Yes, meditation can feel very blissful, but if that is one's only experience of meditation, I have to have some skepticism as to whether or not they're actually meditating, because being deeply present is not always blissful. But this is what we train for. Whatever tools you use, cognitive reframing, emotional release, meditation, being very diligent in monitoring my consumption of alcohol, of sugar, of junk food, being very diligent about exercising 5 or 6 days a week. Those are all the things that they're in my toolbox. These are the things that I do. And I'm grateful that I have those tools, because there have been days when the pieces of my life that have felt so rearranged have been so confusing to me, where I'm just flooded with emotion and I'm like, what the fuck is going on with me? And then it's like, okay, all right, let me cognitively reframe. Let me use some meditation. Let me get some emotions out. Just take some time to cry, scream into a pillow. None of that worked. Oh, let me go lift some weights. It's so practical. It's not very exciting in a lot of ways. People's descriptions of their aha moments of spiritual awakening, sometimes I'm a little jealous. They always sound so much more interesting than any ahas that I've had. I've had very few where it was just like this, the truth is just like sitting on your lap and it's heavy and it will not get off. And I described the first of those in, the introduction to the Courage Habit. Let me go ahead and switch gears just a little bit. I've described this liminal space, and I'm describing it in part to normalize it for other people in case other people are listening to this. And then, I kind of wonder to what degree we're all at some point going to hit the skids on this liminal space thing. So maybe this would be a podcast episode you'd want to bookmark just in case. But what has tipped it off? I don't totally know. I know that leaving California, because it happened during the pandemic and because we were going to go to Las Vegas and then we went to Texas and then we hated Texas and then we went to Colorado, so many moves in such a short time period during a pandemic when it's harder to meet people and get settled and make friends and just get into the rhythms of life. All of that has been a real struggle. But what I would say accelerated everything was this summer, I made a decision to take a sabbatical from my business for the year 2022. I'm in it right now, the sabbatical. I did that because, with my training program, the Courageous Living Coach Certification, it was very clear to me that myself and everyone on the team was just dealing with a lot of burnout, and everyone on the team would have showed up 100% and delivered beautifully, but we were all burned out after 2 years of pandemic. Multiple people on the team also had moved and gone through major transitions as well. And so, it wasn't just the pandemic, it was other things. And I remembered a TED Talk that I saw from Steven Sagmeister, who is this artist and graphic designer. He has a prominent graphic design firm that I believe has locations in New York and other places around the world. And every 7 years, he and his team actually take a sabbatical for an entire year. And his argument is that when the team takes a sabbatical for an entire year, when everybody comes back, and they've done this every 7 years for an entire year, so the 8th year is always a sabbatical year. And you can look up this TED Talk if you look up Sagmeister, Sagmeister. When they come back, he says the sabbatical provides a time of incredible design innovation. And so I said, okay, on a purely pragmatic level, I think we all need a break. We're all tired and we need a break. And then, hey, on another level, this could actually be a really innovative thing for our organization. How cool is that? So that decision was made in July. Earlier in the year, I had taken over financial power of attorney for my dad, who I noticed had been declining, and my sister and I had had some concerns. And so, we made a trip and, we went and visited the lawyer's office and we got some things, settled and handled and things like that. And then this summer, at some point, I got a call from my dad and he was quite agitated about a couple things. And some of the things he was saying didn't make sense, didn't sound right. And I said, okay, I'll make a trip to visit you and we'll get this sorted out. He had a problem he was struggling with. And so I went, and as soon as I saw him, I could tell that his health was, he lost a ton of weight and things were not looking good. And then I made another trip in the summer, and it just was very, very clear, like, okay, my dad he's declining. And I don't even fully have words for how that's hitting me. It's very strange. And I one thing I will tell you is that if you have friends, if you're going through this, you're going to love that I say this. And if anybody is not going through this and you have friends who are going through this, where they have a parent who is really seriously declining, but the parent is still alive, the phrase, at least they're still alive. At least you still have time with them because they're still alive. I'm not into shaming anyone for phrases. I understand the intent behind it when people say this, but it is such a difficult phrase, and it is such an odd kind of grief, because I'm here to tell you right now that when you have a parent or someone very close to you who has a really serious physical or mental health decline, you're grieving that it's like they're alive, but it's done. Like the person they were that you knew is in fact gone. But you're not getting the closure that actual death brings. And of course, I don't wish death on my dad. Come on. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying it's this really weird space to be in. I feel emotional talking about it right now. It is liminal space with him as well. So here I am basically, and quite unexpectedly, without my even realizing it, two big things get rearranged in my life on top of the rearrangement of moving, which is a challenging experience in and of itself. So here I am, and I'm possibly dealing with, and I don't know when, there's no prognostication on that, but so the death of a parent, big, hard, and then deciding to put your career on hold for a year, big, hard. And then that layered on a pandemic, and then that layered on having moved. And, the moving thing is a tough thing to talk about because it's so weird. It's like I wanted to move. I had every positive intention about moving. And then the actual doing of the move is overall a good experience, and I'm glad we did it. But there is a longing and a grieving for the life that we had before we moved. And what I keep coming back to is that what makes it very confusing when that grief comes up is that I don't think I'm grieving where we used to live so much as I'm grieving life before the pandemic. And I wonder how many of you might be feeling some of that as well. Like, do you ever just close your eyes and try to remember a time before the pandemic and then suddenly feel that tightness in your chest of like, oh my God, I want that so badly. I can't even say how badly I want it. That's what it feels like sometimes. The other day I described it with the metaphor of a bruise, that having moved feels a bit like having a bad bruise, like maybe on your arm or your hip. And if you have a bad bruise on your arm or your hip, for the most part, you're just kind of like going about your day, you're living your life, you're fine, no big deal. But then like if you bump into the refrigerator or knock your hip on the counter, it's like, ow, oh man, where did that come from? That hurt. That's what the grief around moving feels like. So it is such a strange liminal space. Here I am, I'm talking so much about grief, but then I can feel it in my body on a somatic level, the peace. And I suppose the peace is due to one thing, which is that whatever I'm walking through right now, regardless of how much sense it makes to anyone else, regardless of whether or not anyone's listening to this and going to themselves, that doesn't sound like that big of a deal, Kate. Like, I don't know why it feels so dramatic for you. Rearranged your life. I don't know. It is very true. And I have never been afraid that I can recall in the presence of the truth. I cannot think of a time when I have ever been afraid in the presence of the truth. And I think it's one of the things that has been part of so many years of being a life coach for me, is that when a client is deeply upset or when a client is deeply joyous, but particularly when a client is deeply upset or when they're really stuck, as long as they're telling the truth, as long as it's honest, there's something about it that I find very gratifying about sitting with another human in the midst of their deepest truth. So what does that all mean? I'm going to start to wrap up this episode here. What it means is I did not feel right about simply going AWOL with my business, with CLCC, with this podcast. I didn't want to define that I would be doing something with this podcast in 2022, because then I would be locked into fulfilling that commitment. Integrity is pretty important to me. If I say I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it. And at the same time, I didn't want to make some declaration that I was not going to write anything for Your Courageous Life or create any podcasts for 2022 or anything like that, because what if I felt like that's what I wanted to do? What I do know is that in this liminal space, I'm in the pond, I'm treading water. It's a balmy day. It's relatively pleasant. It's not a bad gig. It's kind of relaxing. Sometimes it's a little bit more effort. What I do know is that I don't know which boat I'm going to be hopping into. I'm just hanging out right here for now. And that is a radically different thing than I have ever done in my life. I have always been, even when I was a kid, the type A overachiever, happy to make that list and start knocking it out, innovative, curious. Why would I make a small, tent fort when I could turn my entire room into an obstacle course of multiple tent forts? Ambitious, even as a kid. Have always wanted velocity over a slow, sustained pace, and have frankly never really wanted to apologize for that, and still don't. But all that to say, that's a very, very different pattern than I've ever followed in my life. It feels like dancing to a different beat. It feels strange. It sometimes feels scary. It sometimes feels unpleasant. Sometimes feels unbearable. I've cried some hard tears in the past 6 months or so, sometimes to the point of just feeling like, who am I and what is my life about? Existential crisis level of things, which all sounds incredibly overdramatic as I sit here very calmly recording this podcast, but that is a truth I want to tell as well. So where I am right now is I am uncommitted to any path other than the path of following whatever intrigues me. And that has meant that I've been doing some zany things. I just recently completed a couple months of coursework, getting a certification in UX design, user experience design. And I kind of started playing around with coding Python, which is just never Python programming, no interest. I don't know, kind of interested. Not in any way where I'm like, that's my boat. Now I'm going to become a Python programmer. I'm just kind of like, it intrigues me. So I'm playing around with it. I am shifting things relationally a lot. I've had a lot of patterns in relationship of really being that person to try to make sure I was following up with people and how are you doing, and reaching out first. Oh, I haven't heard from them in a little while. Let me see how they're doing. And I just feel more like, I'll just be, and we'll see who reaches out. And maybe I'll get an impulse to reach out, and then maybe I will, but it no longer feels like project managing relationships. It is a profoundly different shift. And for all the things that are changing, it has been very interesting to me to notice the things that stay the same, the things that I do still want around. Writing. I've been back to studying Italian, which I had been on something like a 10-year hiatus from, and now I'm on Duolingo every day. CrossFit. God, I have so much fun with CrossFit. I really do. I know people look at CrossFit. You've heard all these things about CrossFit. So y'all who have never tried it, you think that it's crazy. And I'm here to tell you, CrossFit is the adult version of being at the playground like you were when you were a kid and jumping on stuff and hanging off of stuff and picking up heavy stuff and throwing it on the ground and then running around and then instead of chasing your friends, you're chasing a timer, and that's kind of it. That delights me. That's been good. I still am not drawn to cooking. I still do not fold my laundry after it comes out of the dryer. I thought, I have more time now because I'm not working. My office is going to be so much more organized, and I'm sitting here looking at piles of things that I just don't feel inclined to organize. And then there will be a day when it will intrigue me, I'm sure, to organize it, and then that's when I'll do it. But nonetheless, this liminal space, it's an odd space. So I don't know what 2022 holds. I know that I'm off work for now. I'm feeling deeply contemplative. And I also have an abiding faith that whatever's coming next is the next right thing. And I think that it's a very freeing feeling in many ways to go by this honestly. If the experience that I was having was like looking at everything that had come up to this point, and I'm like, I'm going to burn it all down, I don't know that would be totally emotionally honest. For some people it is. I'm not criticizing anyone else's experience. There are some people who, they get to a kind of, I am in midlife. They get to a kind of midlife reckoning, and they're like, I got to burn it all down. That's the only way to go from here. And it just hasn't been my experience. When I say come by it honestly, I mean come by it honestly for myself. And at the same time, there being no urge whatsoever to leap into the next thing, which I see as an incredible step into my courage. Because in many ways, it would be a lot easier to quickly line up the next thing that looks good on paper and say, this is what I'm going towards. This is what I'm creating. I'm letting go of all this other stuff, but now I'm creating this. And it's just like, no. 2022 can play out how it plays out. And I don't know how it's going to play out. I have no big grand plan. And 2023, revving up again for the Courageous Living Coach certification. As far as I'm aware, that's life right now. Maybe working on another book. Maybe I'll have an idea for another book. I mean, I did just write another book this summer. So the book I wrote this summer is called 100% Fully Alive, and it is linked on my website at yourcourageouslife.com. And yes, you can order it off of Amazon and get it Kindle format or a paperback copy. But nonetheless, don't know where I'm going. Don't even totally feel like my perception of where I have been is completely accurate. Everything feels up for interpretation. But the cool thing is that the horizon is pretty infinite. So that's me. January of 2022. And as you start off on your courageous year to come, however it looks for you, I wish you infinite horizons.